Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of the Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. I'm Jodi, Carlton, your host, and I'm a neurodiverse relationship expert. But like so many of you, I've been on my own journey of discovering and understanding neurodiversity, both in my personal life with my family members and even myself, and professionally as a therapist and now relationship coach to people around the world. I'm often asked, can neurodiverse partner relationships actually work? And the answer is absolutely they can. Just like any relationship, there are core variables that influence whether or not you'll thrive as a couple. Neurodiverse relationships are no different, but they have the added layer of being neurodiverse, where one or both partners is neurodivergent. So this season, I've got a lineup of couples and partners who are in neurodiverse relationships that are working. They get real personal with me about the challenges they have faced and how they've overcome those challenges in their relationships. Let's get started. This episode is one of several that we broke into different episodes where I meet with my panel of neurodiverse professionals. These are my trusted colleagues in this field of neurodiversity. We have psychologists, therapists, coaches. We've come together to create a think tank, if you will, about neurodiversity. Can neurodiverse relationships work? Now, many of the panelists are also individual guests on this season, but I think you're going to find that this panel discussion with 12 of us is going to be super valuable to you. Laura, I want to hear from you. You've had your hand up for a while. And then I want us to segue into what are some of those key differentiators that we see when we have clients come to us and we really see them making progress. What do we notice about our clients that actually are able to move the needle, and what differentiates them from the ones that aren't? And the conversation becomes more of a, how do we make this relationship work, to how do we figure out how to end this? And sometimes that conversation is with one partner. It's not always with both of them together.
Perfect. Try again in different ways is what I like to tell my couples. And it looks 100% different than it would be for couples that are neurotypical or other versions of that. And I say try again until we have issues of abuse, physical, not so much physical, mental, emotional stuff. I think I wanted to make the point that most of the work I do is creating awareness, allowing for awareness for each party to realize the depth of how uncomfortable they are with anything that's uncomfortable, emotionally, relation-wise. Is, do you know how bad it is for you to just sit in this right now? That this just tolerance issue, sitting in the bog together and being okay in that together, even in session, practicing in session, doing an exercise together in session without knowing that they're going to be exhausted and overwhelmed right afterwards. So we have to discuss after that, like we both need to cool off and have a transition time after our session, but being able to hands-on show and do that with a couple has been instrumental in an uptick in progress, if you will. The other thing is measuring what is progress. There's always these roller coaster weeks where great session, great this, that, next session, they're divorcing again. And, we can be there and be present to listen to what's going on. But I like to remind couples that this is an evolutionary process. I realized my spouse has been on the spectrum 7 years ago. We're still figuring it out on a daily basis. I want to tell everybody we're still communicating, 12, 14 times a day and all kinds of issues with that. And so the overwhelm of even having the concept of like, oh my gosh, we have to work on this marriage the rest of our lives together can be overwhelming in and of itself. And it's like, yeah, but this is all micro steps. So I like to point out, you're doing micro steps. When you first came to us, I had a hummingbird and a turtle here. And we've calmed down the hummingbird a little bit, and we've had the turtle be able to listen differently. So now you guys can even hear each other differently. And oh my gosh, you heard something you weren't able to hear before. So it's really breaking things down for them on a level of like showing up is number one, but you can't just show up and be like in La La Land. You've got to show up, and doing the work means being active in your own thoughts and being aware that you are able to try on other hats and other perceptions, open to the concept of trying on other perceptions, open to hearing constructive criticism of it's not black and white. Like there are infinite solutions to what's going on. Try different. You're going to be separate for a little bit. Maybe you want to separate for a little bit. Maybe you're going to be together for a little bit. Maybe you're going to take breaks together and take some time off for each other. And you're going to feel what all of that feels like. I just wanted to give little examples of what that looks like in sessions of, how progress is measured. So it's not like steady over time. There's a lot of little earthquakes and things like that. But as long as you're still showing up and there's that buy-in, and the buy-in is going to look different depending on your own sensory level of the day. And if the moon is in the right position, you get all that. So lastly, I wanted to talk about self-confidence and trust in yourself, because foundationally is a belief system. They're trauma connected, all of that, of when you're differentiating yourself as a couple, there is that like, oh, I guess I never trusted myself. Oh, I guess I don't really love myself. I don't even know what that looks like. So taking that all apart and examining what that might look like, suggesting what it could look like, it's almost giving sometimes options of what that can look like before you even know what your belief system is now.
Yeah. And I want to just add to, you mentioned that kind of circles back to what David said earlier about belief systems, and somebody else mentioned word enmeshed. A lot of times couples are not differentiated from each other, or we've got a lot of codependent type dynamics where there's people pleasing, and individual partners often don't even know who they really are. Or if I know that I can resonate with that so much myself, that I had become such a reflection of my ex-husband. I didn't know who I was. And I tell a story about that a lot and I'll tell it again real quickly, but I was in a therapy session with my son. It was for him. He was having a lot of anxiety, and we were playing a game, and we all had to answer questions, and my turn came and they asked me, what do I do for fun? And my son is sitting there looking at me like, yeah, mommy, what do you do for fun? And I was just like, well, it was all related to my family. It was what they liked for fun. I had no idea who I was. Several people here have mentioned the individual work and the individuals. The couple is not the client. That relationship is made up of two individuals. And in neurodiverse relationships, there's a lot of differences in those two individuals from a neurological neurotype standpoint. Mona.
So I want to go and shift to the next question you asked. So what works? I want to talk about a few things. Everything that everybody has talked about is so phenomenal, but two, maybe three things that haven't come up that I think are important. One is forgiveness, because I hear this from couples repeatedly. They keep bringing back the same things that have caused ruptures over and over again for the last 20, 30 years. They can't let go of it. So I think part of the healing process is being able to forgive. And if you can't do that with your partner, finding a therapist that will help you through that process, because oftentimes that's connected to some childhood wounds, some family of origin stuff, some trauma that you have to work through. So forgiveness is really critical. And then taking the time to heal, because there has been unintentional hurt and pain and toxicity in most neurodiverse relationships. And it's come from both partners. So without taking that time to heal, again, together, individually, however you need to do that, I think it's really hard to move forward and be in a healthy relationship if you have all those open wounds, because every time your nervous system gets dysregulated, you get triggered, something is going to happen. It's going to be very hard to change those neural pathways and those patterns that have created so much hurt in the past. And then the third thing that I think is critical is knowing how to repair after conflict or a rupture has taken place. And we don't learn that, right? So we don't even learn how to do healthy arguments or fighting or communication when we're upset. So I wish that all of us could have an opportunity to learn how to repair in the most healthy way. And the Gottmans talk about how, 69% of the problems we have are perpetual, and they're never going to get resolved. So don't focus on those things. And I think in neurodiverse relationships, it may be even more than 69% because of the sensory issues and our neurological differences and whatever. But focusing on how do we repair for the 31% that are solvable problems is going to be so critical to creating healthy communication, healthy repair, and a healthy relationship.
which means there's going to be a lot of forgiveness. And so can you expound on that a little bit, Mona? Because I know what that means to me, but when you say forgiveness, and that's also a faith term, a heavily loaded faith term, what do you mean by that? Can you explain to folks what you mean by forgiveness?
Yeah. For me, it meant understanding that oftentimes there wasn't intentional harm that my ex-husband was trying to cause. It was literally our brains were wired so differently. We didn't understand each other. So, if somebody is intentionally trying to hurt you, that's a whole other process regarding forgiveness. But if it's due to the neurological differences or there's trauma that's not been healed, I think forgiveness comes from a very different place, if that makes sense. And, it's a process, understanding what your partner was thinking, what their intent was versus how you actually received it. It's hard to forgive if their intent was to be mean, to belittle you, to hurt you, whatever. So I think it's a process for each couple, but it's so critically important.
Yeah. And that forgiveness for me also involves recognizing that my pain is still real and what happened, what I felt is still real, but also understanding, like you said, where my partner was coming from or what happened, why, and being able to move past it versus staying so locked down. I have a client right now who's really struggling with that part of it, the forgiveness, and it's really blocking her from being able to move forward with the repair.
I think it's no small thing that we all on this podcast have lived experience. I really think that when we can hear the wife or hear the husband and we say, we get it, and we're able to say something that's very empathetic, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're finally that person that understands. So no, you don't have to have it, but I think it really is key. And I want to give a shout out to Natalie Roberts too. This is a full circle moment for the two of us today. After years of knowing my husband was on the spectrum, he agreed for coaching for the two of us, and we worked with Natalie. And I have to say, one of the biggest thing, there were two things that Natalie did for us. One was the empathy part. That's the part. She lived the lived experience, and she could pull me aside and said, Heidi, I get it. This is hard. And you've done everything you possibly can. And then the second thing is both of us had a picture in our head about what married couples should be and what they should do and what it should look like. And she gave us permission to be who we are in our space. And she said it many times. And that was the other thing, kind of the repetition. Don't be afraid to repeat. And I'm the neurotypical one. And it was helpful to me to have her repeat over and over. Y'all, it does not have to look like the movies. It will not look like the movies or like Hallmark. It will look like what the two of you want it to look like. And we've done that. And like somebody else said, I think it was Laura, try and try again. She gave us that permission to just experiment and try different things. Regarding repair, I want to share a technique that my husband and I came up with that worked. And it actually did tie back into the forgiveness. He would write once a day, sometime during the day, he would journal one autism experience. And it may have been about one of our tricky areas, or it may not have been. It may not even have been about us. But he would journal and he would write the date, the event, what it was that happened. Then he would write, what were my feelings? And he'd write the feelings. And he would write, what would he do differently? And what were some autism tools that he could have used in that moment? And then in the evening, he would read it to me. And if any of you are familiar with 12-step, this looked a little bit like step 9, a little bit, right? He would share this moment with me, and it did a number of things for me. Number one, it showed me his effort because I couldn't always see it, to be honest. But this showed me effort on his part. Number two, it gave him time to get in touch with his feelings, which is something he has trouble with. Getting in touch with them and then labeling them. So he found that helpful. The third thing is over time, it allowed him to see patterns. So after about, I don't know how long, but certainly several months, maybe even a year, he was able to say to me, "Oh my gosh, Heidi, I have done this to you over and over again, and I'm so sorry." The fourth thing it did for both of us, he would share an example, what he would call an autism moment. And I would be able to say to him, "Oh, sweetheart, I would have done the same thing. That wasn't autism." Or, "Oh, honey, we all feel that way. We would all feel that way." And I'll give you this one example in wrapping up. We were at church on Mother's Day, and he went up to a dear friend of his who had lost her teenage daughter in a car wreck, their only child. And he went up to her and he said, "Happy Mother's Day." And she started bawling. And he embraced her. And that was his autism moment. He felt so bad because he thought he had messed up and he thought he had hurt her. And I said, "Oh, no, no." I said, "What you saw her today, you saw her and remembered her daughter and remembered her as a mother. And those tears were tears of gratitude and just tenderness." And you just see the relief in him. So that's, a practical tip that worked for us. And I'll close with that. Thanks. And thanks, Natalie.
And I want to just add to that story there that a lot of people may have resisted wishing her happy Mother's Day because of her loss, whereas he saw her in that moment and gave her that affirmation because she didn't stop becoming a mom when she lost her child. But you were able to help him see what she felt in that moment. And I think that is what so many of us are able to do, that being a translator, helping people translate what those differences between each other for couples. And I think that just being able to see both sides for so many of us to be able to understand the neurotypical, the neurodivergent. But I also want to go back to, you gave a shout out to Natalie, and I want to just emphasize that those of us here, we all, not only do we refer to each other, we trust each other with our own lives and our own relationships. And for me, it was actually Mona who said to me at one point, "Jodi, you know you're ADHD, right?" And I was like, "What?" I couldn't believe I didn't recognize. And she started just saying, "Well, yeah." And she started listing all this stuff. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then I went to David and I said, "Mona said I'm ADHD." And David's known me a while. And he's like, "Well, duh." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Because I was too close to it to see it myself, even though I work in this space. And that just goes back to how many have already said, we're still learning too. This is a journey. This is a process. We're a little bit farther down that road than those of you that we're trying to help, but we're still in it as well. But we trust each other. David's worked with my ADHD son for a couple of years, and he's an excellent coach for boys and men. And so that's why I value all of you so much. And again, I'm so glad we're able to come here together and talk about all of this for folks. Okay, Stephanie.
All right. Well, I've given some shout out. A tool that I use with my husband and with my clients is a tool by Mona Kay and her Neurodiverse Love conversation cards. Sometimes some of my clients, they truly believe they sit down and talk about it and come to some understanding. It's like all of a sudden we have social communication skills and executive function strategies and all of that. We have this like high woulda, coulda, shoulda. Well, if he should, I shouldn't have to. He shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to do this in text. We shouldn't have to do this in a book. We shouldn't have to have it over 5 sessions of talking. And somebody mentioned it, I don't know who, but they said it's going to take more than 2 or 3 sessions. Like sometimes 6 months in, I'm like, this isn't helping. We're not getting anywhere. And I'm like, it took you decades to get here. Weeks to months is going to get you, out of it. But sometimes some of my couples will fight using a tool or a strategy because it should be natural. It should be spontaneous. It should be organic. And I'm like, most of life, even neurotypical couples can't do things spontaneous, organic. Kids doing things, obligations, work. You're romanticizing this spontaneous, organic, authentic thing when it's like we need time and we need tool and we need a strategy. And I love Dr. Gottman's stuff, but I tried using some of Dr. Gottman's cards and the language would trip up my husband. It would say, "What is your favorite book?" That seems like a very simple question, but I could see in my husband's eyes what he was doing, cataloging, like what genre, like what am I reading? And I was like, halt, 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 stop. I see what you're doing. Too hard, black and white. What's your favorite book you're reading this week? Or what's the favorite book or a book you would like to share with me? So I would have to like go through with the marker. Okay, do not say a or the or one because it flips into the all or nothing thinking. But the neurodiverse love cards, such things into consideration with language and considering different neurotypes. But whatever the tool or strategy is, again, this kind of falsehood that we figured it out, we understand each other. I shouldn't have to use a tool. And so my couples were like, we're off the rails again. First question, are you using your tools and strategies? Well, no. We thought that la 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 la. It's like, but remember a tool and a strategy. This is a lifetime thing. Like we don't just get over it. We don't just suddenly learn. And so one tool and tip and strategy Dan and I use is if Dan wants to share something with me, sometimes we will write it down first. Not to say that all autistic people articulate things better in writing, but my husband does. And he will say it beautifully and express himself in a better way if it's a handwritten note. And so if he starts that conversation in the morning, and then if I see it and I write something down too, at least my thoughts are there. And then dinner or after dinner, whenever we can have that conversation, the notes are there that he can refer back to for his memory and his executive function. And my emotions might be so that we can have the discussion and we can use that book. We write back to and forth to each other. If it's the middle of the day, his preferred method is email. He's like, if I get it on the phone, that looks urgent and it freaks me out. Don't text it unless it's more urgent. If it's something, put a time sensitive or when does this need to be discussed? Or are you just venting or whatever? But it takes my face instead of my body language out of it. So when I worked with littles, some of the kids would say, Miss Stephanie, your face and your body is too loud. And I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do about that. Even if my tone is nice and friendly and joyful and I'm even smiling a lot, that was sometimes too much for the little guys. And I use my hands a lot. I've been sitting on my hands a lot while we've been talking. So that's to take into consideration. Sometimes my face and my body and my reactions are too loud for my people and my family. So writing or emailing, it does slow down the process. And to the neurotypical spouse, yes, you're not getting the immediate, but we got to put off short-term, long-term. I say, what do you want? Do you want understanding and resolution, or do you just want to spit out all the emotions and just be validated and heard? I think Jodi said that. Do you really want to work out the problem, or do you just want to blow up and throw up all over every place? You got to use the tool or strategy to get you to the desired outcome and give up that this is just organic, authentic, spontaneous. Use your tools and strategies, please.
Yes, and I want to add a little personal story about I talk with my hands too, and I had an autistic person tell me I was yelling at him because I was using my hands. I was like, what? He was seeing that as it was too much. It was too much.
I wanted to come back to what you said, Jodi, about, and someone else mentioned intent, and you picked up on that. I think one of the things I see is that sort of disparity where you said maybe the neurodivergent partner will say, you can't feel that way because I never intended to hurt you or I never meant it that way. And we try and get them some understanding around their thought process. And it was just a fact. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't meant to hurt you. But then sometimes there's a resistance to recognizing that actually just because you didn't intend it, it did hurt. So sometimes that's the hurdle. It's like the understanding that, well, if I didn't intend to hurt you, then you can't be hurt. So I find that progress can be made once that barrier is sort of broken down. And I think saying about this, like romance and being organic, there's a wish that neurodiverse couples can really understand each other, that understand each other's souls and be soulmates. But it's about that acceptance, isn't it? Sometimes you won't understand it because you're wired differently and your brain's never going to understand something that's so at odds with how your brain's working. But if you can get to that acceptance and that tolerance, you know, and I think with my ex-husband, he would always say, okay, I don't get it. Or, you don't need to get it. Okay, well, that's fine then. I don't get it, but I have to accept that that's it.
Sometimes that neurodivergent partner, when they don't intend harm, sometimes then feel like they're being judged for doing something wrong. And then that's real difficult. But I agree with you that getting past that hurdle of recognizing that it's your realities are still real for both of you. And even though I didn't mean it, it still happened for you. And the capacity or motivation to get across that hurdle with my clients, that's one of the key features, or the core features of a couple who has the potential for progress, is when, even though I don't understand you, I'm willing to hold space that my perspective is just mine, and that's cognitive empathy, theory of mind. And there's a lot of myths, I guess, around cognitive empathy, that autistic individuals in particular are not capable of cognitive empathy. And I think it's there at varying degrees, but it's also, it's like Jana was saying, there's skills that can be learned. We can teach cognitive empathy, even if it feels really clunky and scripted at first, and it still may not feel natural. It may still feel very foreign, but the willingness to acknowledge that there is another perspective is where it starts. And some partners are not even willing to acknowledge. And then that, to me, is kind of one of those lines in the sand of whether or not there's hope for this couple or not. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that ties into abuse as well. And as you say, one of the tricky things, and we have to do it, is we have to call out abuse. We have to call out the fact that they're in a toxic environment. And this isn't wrong or right, as in how they're behaving. It's the dynamic that's causing that. Because you do get that sort of like, you're telling me it's because I'm autistic. No, I'm telling you this because you're very different and you're not understanding it. And one of the things I always say is, it doesn't matter. We're not saying you're an abuser. We're not saying you're being abusive, but your partner feels abused. What's more important is understanding how, or accepting how your partner feels. And as you say, if there isn't that sort of understanding that there's a different reality, and have some empathy around that.
Or a willingness to even open space for it. And I see that with both neurodivergent and neurotypical partners. A lot of my neurotypical partners struggle with that cognitive empathy too. It's not just an autistic trait.
I had like 3 small things I think I wanted to just add on to what people have said, as maybe the way I've understood a couple of the things they're sharing that have really helped me. One was Mona's point, really helpful, about forgiveness and what that has meant to me, particularly as someone in a relationship where a lot of the time it's felt like the other person isn't interested, and it's been a lot of me doing a lot of working on myself and figuring out a lot of these issues by myself a lot of the time. And a lot of people would forgiveness feels really difficult, I think, when you haven't got that where you can go to the other person, or all those things. So I think for me, it's remembering that forgiveness is for you. Like the role of forgiveness is to be something to benefit you. The other person isn't coming and asking for you. So this is something that you do for yourself. And it's certainly about healing. And if we're struggling with it, there needs to be a readiness, I think. And so if you're not ready, there's a clue there, and find the support for that. But for me, it's been about being able to change my relationship with what's happened, to change my relationship with the past, my relationship with it, but not to change what happened. So we're not, as somebody said, it's not changing what happened. It's still recognizing the impact and everything about what happened. But in order that you can live now, in order that you can live better in the future, it's about how you, with support, change your relationship with that. And that actually doesn't need another person to do anything any different. So I think that's one really important thing. Because otherwise people can, again, because our main audience, Heather and I, is people that are working on their own, often feel that that's a huge barrier to anything being any better for themselves, is that. So that's one thing I really wanted to encourage. And another thing in Loving Difference that we talk about with acceptance is there's quite a narrative around acceptance in the neurodiversity space, that it's about making it okay. So when I accept it, I'm saying it's okay, or I'm saying I'm all right with it, or I like it. You have to like it now. And we just don't say that. So what we say is acceptance is about accepting what is, and it's okay to not like it. Know what's okay to say. I accept what is, and be clear that if you don't like it, now we figure out what next. So again, I just want to, let's have a different perspective on, yes, acceptance, and it's okay to like it and not like it. Hugely, hugely important. And the other thing, which I think is a tool or a phrase or just a practice that's really helped me, when some people were talking about, I think, let me just roll over, it was Laura, was talking about the challenge that many, I think this is probably all humans currently is,
This is not a neurodiversity. This is everyone thing. The ability to be in not knowing and in uncomfortable. And I'm not taught, we're not equipped for being in uncertainty. We're taught to be right, to know, that's what we've been educated to do. And we have a culture like that. And to sit in discomfort. And I realized that was one of the first things my counselor said to me. Again, there's nothing neurodiversity related, really. It's just about what your relationship is with uncertainty. And I have my phrase for that I've picked up from somebody else is the space between stories. So it's about sitting and practicing and finding a way. It's a practice, really, of being in the space between stories. And sometimes that might be the space between the story of what you've said and they say, like one interaction, like really tiny. But it might also be the space between the story of what has been and what's going to be. And at some points in our relationship, when it's been very uncertain, that's been nearly 2 years of a space between don't know and now I think I know something. And other times it's a smaller amount of time. But it's a helpful phrase to just think I'm in the space between the story of who I was and who I want to be, or what I'm deciding now and when it's happened, and being able to exist or live and actually thrive and be well in that space, I think is one of the most important things, because sometimes that could be a long time. It could be in a session or it could be in a week or whatever. So space between stories is something that we coach and is really, really helpful.
Okay, so I was thinking as you guys were talking, getting my brain warmed up, but I have a nice little list here of things that I see. I will see an investment in self-healing start to happen rather than just coming in and fix my partner. There's something wrong with them, fix them. So rather than being like other thinking, or even marriage centered, you'll see a person start to calm and be able to, both parties looking at themselves a bit, even if they're doing some couples work at the same time, they're doing their own work. I see, they're caring about, and somebody else mentioned this, which made me think about it, but caring about the impact that they make rather than sitting and justifying their intent over and over and over, right? Like really getting that, even though you might be systematic and logical, that your partner might really just need you to understand the impact, and you're able to kind of withhold the explanations, which is really hard for some people. So to get to that place is a really beautiful indicator that somebody is willing to set their self aside and their thinking pattern for the sake of their partner, at least for a moment, right? And hear the impact. I see couples start making their own tools. Like they start getting the concepts that keep being, introduced, or they catch on to how I'm helping them create tools out of really foundational skills. And they'll show up and they'll be like, guess what we did? And I'm like, oh man, you're putting me out of business. Good job.
And I'll tell them, okay, thanks for that. I'm going to use that.
Right. Which I think they receive as a compliment, Jodi.
Oh, yeah.
Greatest compliment that a couple's like, wow, we're doing good enough that you would use this with other people.
Yeah.
They invest in learning about each other's brain. So they're really like, both at some level, even if it's a different pace, different speed, they're really invested in that. A big one that I get rave reviews on from the neurodivergent community is that there is no right or wrong. There's just what's right for us. And I think that comes from living in a majority culture for so long. The reality that, wow, people are starting to notice there isn't a right or wrong. The majority culture is not right. It's what's right in your house, and developing this common culture and language that's okay with you. And then the last one that I wrote down, triggered by Mona's bringing up Gottman, is that I really see these couples that are being successful start believing me that conflict actually equals to a greater connection. So less fear of it, because they now have some systemized tools and the training, and they're willing to embrace it and use it. And then like they're able to maintain the 69.9%, right? And they're also willing to walk into the more acute a little better, right? So that's my list.
I love that list. Thank you for that list, Robin. Jana, I saw you lowered your hand. Do you still want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, this kind of circles back and brings us full circle to the provider and the participants. But shout out to Barbara. My husband and I worked with her for a few sessions. And one of the things that was so critical was separating the two of us and having accountability for each person, and then bringing us back together and having that accountability in front of each other. Because what she's able to read between the lines is regardless of neurotype and all of that, the fact that you are doing this dance means each of you have a part that you are contributing. And so if we're just really focusing on one person's unhealthy behavior, even if that's louder and more obvious and whatnot, we're missing something, because if the other person had good boundaries, that wouldn't be happening. So just that interplay between both and having that responsibility for each person and sometimes getting them apart to figure out what that looks like, or speaking to them honestly and kindly, I think is really, really important. So it's both a participant willingness, but also the coach or the therapist able to see the value of holding each person accountable.
You articulated that perfectly, and is exactly why I also work with them individually. Beautiful. All right, folks. Thank you so much for being part of this panel and for everything. Everybody has had so much value to add. Thank you to all of you. All right. Well, I know everybody's busy, so have a great month, and I'll see you next
Thank
month.
you, Jodi.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so you won't miss any of these amazing interviews. And as always, if you're benefiting and enjoying this podcast, please give us a review. It really helps other people know that this podcast is really beneficial and worth listening to. Thanks for watching on YouTube or tuning in to your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to visit me online at jodicarlton.com for more resources. I have assessment quizzes, educational articles, courses, and more. And if you have any questions, just reach out to my team at gethelp@jodicarlton.com. Until next time.